Coffee Club, an event jointly hosted by NOT1BEAN and We Don't Have Time. This is the first Coffee Club. It will be a monthly event. Before we get into this, I'd like to thank the people behind the scenes here at what We Don't Have Time. You know, Adam, Victor in particular, and Sarah. We have Mike in the UK who works with me with NOT1BEAN. This event is it's probably a little different to what people are used to. I'm invited to events on a daily basis, probably the same as most people on here, and it would probably be quicker to talk about what this event is not about. We are inundated, and rightly so, with information on climate change, the devastation caused, and we're in no doubt that we're in the grip of a climate emergency. As I say, we're not playing this down or anything. We're not. We see that you know, rightly so. We are inundated with this on a daily basis. Whether it's drought, flooding, fires, crop failures, migration of peoples, whatever it is, the information is out there. We just happen to believe that the debate over whether we are in the grip of a climate emergency is still a debate. We firmly believe that the time has passed for debate, and we're not here to offer facts and figures and the latest data. We genuinely want to highlight, to showcase climate ambition, companies that bring positive impact to the table. We're joined today by two individuals from very different companies, who you'll hear about shortly. You'll hear from shortly. And as I say, we're going to focus this event on positive climate impact, solutions as opposed to problems. We do feel as if we are preaching to the converted. Whenever we speak to We Don't Have Time, whenever we're involved with climate reviews, whenever we post climate reviews, be they positive, negative, whenever we're part of the conversation, we are talking to the converted here. We talk to people who share our concerns, and we really wanted to offer a platform for companies and individuals to bring their, I hesitate to say, solutions to the forefront. There's no restrictions on this, on scale of the initiatives. It doesn't matter whether you're a corporation, whether you represent a corporation, or whether you're an individual with an idea. We'd be happy to speak with you. The social media reach of We Don't Have Time is quite considerable. It's an amazing platform. It really is. Some of the members there are, you know, people like BT, the United Nations Development Program, Ericsson. These people are on there reading reviews, reading about solutions, contributing to the conversation. And we also have, I don't know, well, without taking away Adam Valeen's thunder, he'll tell you about We Don't Have Time shortly, but their reach is phenomenal. It really is. And the events that they currently host reach an enormous amount of people. And we're very proud to be associated with them. Obviously, from our perspective, you know, we work in the coffee sector. I'm speaking to you today from Colombia. I live and work in the coffee sector in Colombia. So apologies in advance if there's any noise at my end, but it's a working area, it's heavily populated, and it's quite noisy at times. But anyway, the platform is there for presenting, for showing climate impact, positive climate impact. We're planning on this being a monthly event. We've had an enormous response from companies and individuals alike. I mean, you know, the opportunity, there's no financial commitment to be part of this. We're going to offer this short talks from varying companies and individuals. We're going to do this on a monthly basis, as I say. At the end of the year, the plan is to revisit the year to see progress from companies and individuals that we've featured on the coffee club. It's not going to be about coffee. We are obviously, we are biased. We work in the coffee sector, but there are no restrictions on who wants to come on and speak, who wants to present findings, research, or whatever. We just called it the coffee club to go with. This is very much sort of the pilot episode, and we are, as I say, we are not resigned to purely negative impact. We want this to be a positive event. We're all aware of the shortcomings of various players. We had, I say had because it's no longer particularly relevant, but even to the point where the British government contacted us to be a part of this. We had a sitting member of parliament to open this today, confirmed. However, with the events in Afghanistan, we lost the MP who was booked to appear, but he will be back at a later date. So, you know, everyone from MPs through to finance companies, research institutes, people on the ground in places like Nepal, which you'll hear about later, will be appearing, and we hope more and more people will take the opportunity to join us and to present positive stories, positive impact, and how we're going to go about addressing what is an enormous challenge for all of us. We don't have time. They say join us and be part of the solution. We hope you take them up on that. The platform's a wonderful platform. All types of views and opinions are expressed on there openly. It's a healthy platform to discuss concerns and to showcase ideas. And this event hopefully will live up to their standards. As I say, we have 2 companies, 3 including mine, NOT1BEAN, speaking today. They're only short talks, but at this point, I'd like to hand over to Adam from We Don't Have Time, who's here to give us a quick insight into We Don't Have Time, and then I'll come back and introduce the people who've kindly given up their time to speak with us today. So if you're about, Adam, are you there?
Thank you, Gary, and thank you so much for the kind words and for the introduction to We Don't Have Time. We're happy to support this. As we say a lot, it's very important to actually talk about what's being done, as well as talking about the severity of the climate crisis. So we're happy to be here, and I'm going to just share a bit about what We Don't Have Time is for those of you who are not familiar with us, and why we think it's so important to work with communicating climate solutions. So here's to start from the beginning. Here's the situation that, according to us, we're in right now. You'll be hard pressed to find any high-level office basically anywhere in the world where the climate crisis is not being discussed to some extent. Any big organization that hasn't at least made a statement on the climate crisis is bound to be asked to address it in some way. And most have already done so. The past few years, we've seen net zero pledges, we've seen ambitions to be climate friendly at some point in the future be flung around left and right from all parts of society. And this is good in a way. Since it increases the awareness, it pushes the boundary of what it means to be front runner on the climate, and it really normalizes this idea that we need to be doing this at some point. At the same time, we are seeing a stark lack of real action. The emissions continue to rise year on year on year, and we are not at all even close to the scale of action that we need to avoid the worst effects of this crisis. And this is not, as Gary mentioned, this is not for a lack of solutions in the world. I'm sure that all of us in this call could name 10 solutions at least each that would all have a considerable effect on the climate crisis if it was used at scale. So we are aware of the climate crisis and we have the solutions we need. So the question here is, why aren't we implementing them? What is going on? And the simple answer, which is not so simple to fix from us, is that it's not profitable to talk about. No, it's profitable to talk about solving the climate crisis, but it's not profitable to actually do it, at least not in the short term, which is what is important right now for most businesses. And we need to change this because we need to both talk about solving the climate crisis and also actually take action and do it. But what can we do about it? What can we as small-scale actors, relatively speaking, realistically do to influence the actions of these large organizations that effectively are the ones that can get us out of this crisis? Our answer is this. In a global ecosystem where we are all connected by the press of a button, communication and climate action are tightly connected. Simply put, if you communicate that you are taking climate action, you need to also take climate action. And the other way is also true. If you take climate action, if you do something good for the climate, you need to also talk about it. Let me give you an example to make this clearer. Say your neighbor installed solar panels on the roof, and you see that they have done that. You might be intrigued by this. You might wonder, why are they doing this? Is this better in any way? Are they better than me for doing this? You might search the web for more info on solar panels. You might ask them what their secret scheme is with this. You might realize that it's good for the economy and for the climate to do it. And then you might be interested in doing it yourself. And when you do, you will in turn influence someone else to do it, and then on and on and on, like rings on water, until you have a whole street who's changed to low carbon electricity, massively reducing the climate footprint of the neighborhood. Now, in the other multiverse, where your neighbor just changed their electricity deal to only include solar without actually showing it in some way, you would never know about it unless you ask them. And that's the important part, because your motivation to change your electricity would be unchanged from before. You would lose the diffusion effect of spreading the behavior further, and there would be only one person on the street with low carbon electricity. And that doesn't make a huge difference. And we need to make a huge difference quickly. So doing what we do here in this event, sharing good initiatives and explaining why they are good, is the most effective climate action we can take right now. Moreover, it's imperative that we do it and that more and more actors do it, because that's how we can get the speed we need to avoid the worst effects of the climate crisis. So, how do we make it clear that this is a reasonable and profitable way to do business? I mean, legislation is one way, which we've talked about a lot and something that I would personally love to see, but there's something much more concrete that you and we can all be a part of doing, which will in turn make legislation more likely by shifting public opinion. And this is what we do at We Don't Have Time. We Don't Have Time is a review platform for the climate where anyone in the world can sign up and highlight positive climate initiatives, like those presented here in this call, and give them the public attention they deserve and need to spread. And what's more is that the reviews will also affect an organization's climate rating, which means that anyone can see that they've done something good for the climate. So like the neighbor with the solar panels, other organizations can go there and look at it and be intrigued and say, why are they talking about this here? How does this benefit them? And they will realize that a lot of people are giving them love for what they're doing. Stakeholder engagement, good reviews, that is good for business. And through highlighting positive actions like this, we have enabled stakeholder dialogues with the Norwegian government, Volvo, Deloitte. We can really influence action on a large scale like this. And what if they don't act? Well, they can get bad reviews as well. I won't talk too much about this because this event is about highlighting good initiatives. But I need to mention that if you want people to believe you're serious about the climate crisis, you need to take action. Otherwise, you will get a bad reputation, which is bad for business. You can't just talk about taking action. You need to actually do it as well. And through We Don't Have Time, this can happen quickly, and we can see change happen. As an example, Tesla moved off Bitcoin recently, thanks to a large amount of criticism because of the carbon footprint connected to Bitcoin. And we at We Don't Have Time had multiple warnings that we forwarded to the Tesla team, and that was part of enabling their direct change in policy. So this is another sign that by working together, we can really move mountains. We actively team up with organizations that have an honest intention to be a true part of the solution to the climate crisis. We do this by helping you communicate your climate action in a dependable, transparent way, which creates trust and engagement. This is very much what Gary talked about before. We've helped NOT1BEAN to communicate what they're doing and try to reach out both to other people through the events and social media reach that he talked about. We have an average social media reach of between 25 and 50 million reach people every month, but also through actively coaching you in how to talk in a way that gives trust and makes people want to engage with you. And in the platform itself, we have our core of what we call climate influencers who help make your communication better and who help spreading what you do through their own networks. We are also present on other social media. We're present in we reach over 140 countries. We teamed up with over 100 partner organizations to make sure that the climate initiatives that are communicated on our platform reach the right people to make a difference. That's what it's all about. But we need to be more to do it efficiently. We need to engage everyone who want to be a part of the solution so that we can influence those who are not engaged to actually take action. In an academic setting, just to bring that in a little bit, this is called influencing climate action in society. The picture here is from the 1.5 degrees business playbook, which is a document that was designed by scientists and activists and business leaders that explain how corporations can align with a strategy that keeps global temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius, or at least as close to it as possible, since looking at the new IPCC report, we've probably already missed that mark. This is, if everyone followed this playbook, we would have a much better situation. And the fourth and final step of that playbook is by influencing actions beyond your own business. You do it by capturing engagement from customers, suppliers, employees, and other groups, and you need to share your results publicly. This is what we do. We do it together, and this is why communication is so important to actually push climate action on a larger scale. We need to influence action in all of society, not just those who are already doing what they can. As Gary said, we can't just preach to the already converted. We need to reach a larger portion of society, and we can do that together. So with that being said, I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations here today. And on behalf of the We Don't Have Time team, we really hope that the initiatives that are presented here and in future iterations of this event can spread way beyond the people on this call, even beyond the people watching this stream. And I really want to see this conversation continue. So please join We Don't Have Time via our website or our app. Ask questions to our speaker in the pinned post, and we'll make sure that we try to answer them after this event. And keep sharing good climate initiative with us so that we can show the laggards what they're missing. We can show them that if you do good things, that will pay off in the end. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much. That, well said. Well said. You know, I don't want to repeat anything you've said. I would like to just add one point. It basically, I do agree with everything that you've just mentioned, Adam. We do see good news in the media. I mean, I think it was the day before yesterday that Maersk, the shipping line. Sorry if you can hear dogs in the background. There's nothing I can do about that. Maersk, the shipping line, have committed to spending $1 billion, I think it is, on green or climate neutral ships. You can hear my dog. They're not my dogs. And this is good news. Obviously, it's good news. However, a lot of people are probably struggling with, or they're probably under a misconception that it is the big corporations that need to lead the way on this, that they're somehow the only people that can actually influence this reaction, that can provide the answers on any scale to change things. We firmly don't believe that. We're of the opinion that it's going to be the man on the street, it's going to be individuals, it's going to be consumers, either directly with their initiatives at whatever level, or individual pressure on these big corporations to do things the like of which Maersk have just done. The bigger we are, the more we get the message out, the more companies that think they can sit in the background doing nothing and just professing to agree with us will be forced into action. So if you are a member of a corporation and you want to take an initiative to your boss, to your managers, to the board, whatever, and you want some backing from us to do that, we'll gladly speak to you. We'll happily talk to anyone in any company, large or small, across the planet, with a view to getting them on board here to discuss how we can actually push things. Note that I'll leave it at that. I think I don't have any questions, Adam. I mean, we use We Don't Have Time regularly, as you know. Do you find that there's more one question I do have: do you find that there's more reaction from a positive or a negative post or review when we don't have time?
Yeah, that's a great question actually, and I forgot maybe to introduce myself, so I'll do that now because it gives some context to my response. My name is Adam Wallin, as Gary said, and I'm the head of climate dialogue at We Don't Have Time. So I'm in charge of helping all of the corporations to actually maintain this climate dialogue with us. And what we've seen is that we have a massive surplus of positive reviews. I think about 60 to 70% of the reviews that are posted to our platform are climate love. So we have created an atmosphere where it's encouraged to give positive feedback, which creates a very strong sense of making it worthwhile to do good. And then once the posts themselves have been posted, we see a very high interaction rate with the positive news generally. There are, of course, select cases where the negative reviews get higher impact, and that's when they are truly devastating. They handle an issue which is really important or really sensitive. And what I can also notice is that when we ask for responses, we do see that negative responses tends to be easier to get a response to a negative review than a positive review. And that has to do with the fact that there's two things to build to that. One, if a company has negative media exposure, which our reviews are usually based on, they usually already have a response prepared, which makes it very easy for them to respond to us as well. And also, they might feel a higher urgency to responding if they have a negative review and they want to fix their negative rating. But we do see a ton of responses to the positive reviews as well. So it's we definitely see a lot of appreciation from the recipients. I also wanted to kind of tag on a little bit to what you said, Gary, about the who is going to be a part of the transition, because we really also, of course, really agree that you can't discount the smaller actors or the individuals. We very much build our entire power comes from smaller actors and individuals who work together to influence the big ones. We talk a lot in terms of disruptors and transformers, and I think this is where it's clear that we need both smaller and larger actors, because we need the disruptors, which is the smaller actors who prove that it's possible and it's most of the time even profitable to take action, to innovate, to do things differently, and to move away from the climate destructive practices. But we also need the transformers, which is the larger corporations, the larger actors who can then follow the disruptors. So as you said, it's very often that the larger organizations will follow, but once the disruptors are there and once the connection is made, it's a lot easier for them to make the change on a large scale quickly, which is also really important. So we need the smaller actors to push on the larger actors, and we need the larger actors to actually take the responsibility and make the necessary changes, because they can really buy us a lot of time if they change quickly.
Okay. Well, at this point, I mean, I have nothing to add to that in terms of an introduction to the event. It's fairly straightforward. We're going to showcase positive action. We're going to do it on a monthly basis. If we need to do it on a more regular basis, then so be it. We are happy to do this. There's no financial commitment as far as speaking on this event. That we don't have time. Reach is phenomenal. It really is. And we hope everybody watching today will take it further and get in touch. We'll tell you how to do that later on. But right now, I'd like to I'd like to introduce Dr. Morgan Phillips from the Glacier Trust. He's there, I think. Yeah, I can see it now. Morgan, if you would like to introduce yourself, and you're very welcome to be here and tell us about the work that you're doing, and how we can help you with that with a platform like this.
Brilliant, thank you, Gary, and yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to join. It's really great to have a chance to have these conversations. We're a charity rather than a business, so we're based in the UK, and we enable climate change adaptation in Nepal, in the Himalaya mountains in Nepal, in the villages up there, where climate change is having all sorts of different kind of impacts, from glacier melt and the impact that has on water availability in the villages, but also temperatures rising, insect pest infestations, landslides, the way the monsoon season is changing, so they're getting drought and deluge of rains going on. So we're working kind of in that space, and we kind of talk about ourselves as a climate change adaptation charity, but really we're working on social justice issues, we're working on mitigation climate change as well as improving biodiversity and so on in Nepal and in the mountain areas. So it's always easier to just to stick to one kind of area of expertise, but really we're quite broad in what we do. So I'm going to just share my screen. Hopefully you can see this. Let's start from the start. Okay. So this is so you can find out more about us at theglaciertrust.org, and the Glacier Trust is our Twitter handle as well. So if you want to follow along about what we're doing, like I say, we're a small charity and work in partnership with NGOs in Nepal to enable climate change adaptation in communities like the one there on the screen. That's the sort of environment we work in. So very small scale agricultural communities, lots of terraces where traditionally rice and maize and millet and things are grown, but increasingly working towards an agroforestry approach to adaptation, but also mitigation of climate change as well. So that's who we are. I'm going to talk to you today mostly about a project that we've just started now called Great Adaptations, which is a kind of awareness raising campaign. So in terms of that, this is one of our first big opportunities to talk about what we're doing with the Great Adaptations project. But it's also a book which we've just been crowdfunding for, and comes out in September 14th in the UK, but I think it's available in quite a few other countries as well. And we're also going to release a podcast series as well in October, November time, talking to various people who work on adaptation from different sort of angles of it. So that's coming up as well in October. And really we put this project together partly because it was lockdown and we couldn't go to Nepal and we had a bit of time. But really it's to try and get adaptation as a topic, as a kind of subtopic of climate change, further up the agenda and get more people thinking about it and talking about it, especially in the run up to COP26. So what I want to do today is to talk to you about quite a few different sort of examples of adaptation that are happening around the world. Some of them are good, really positive ones. Some of them are quite ugly, quite bad ones, and some of them are great. And I'll try and finish on the great stuff at the end, and the more positive forms of adaptation and how it kind of intersects with other issues and other agendas around social justice and mitigation of climate change. So I'm going to start here, which is Staten Island, not here as in, it's not where I am. I'm actually in West Wales at the moment, but on the map, in that red circle, that's Staten Island, which is just in the south of New York. And I want to talk to you about what happened there in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy that happened in October 2012. So I'm sure most of you remember what happened there. There was Hurricane Sandy kind of moved its way up the eastern seaboard of the US, causing all sorts of damage, and then coalesced with several other tropical storms to create this massive superstorm, which absolutely kind of devastated the east coast of the States at the time. And Staten Island, despite being one of the wealthiest parts of New York, probably one of the wealthiest parts of the world, wasn't spared from this damage. There was so much of the buildings were destroyed there. Actually, the whole Superstorm Sandy as a whole, I think it destroyed something like 650,000 buildings in the US and killed 87 people. So it was a really major event when it happened. And so in Staten Island, in the aftermath of it, after the clear up, the residents there, especially the ones living on the kind of beach resorts on that East Coast, they started to think about what they would do what they would do kind of afterwards. This is kind of a picture of the damage that was caused there. They had kind of two options, really. They could either stay there and rebuild and hope to kind of build back better, as a kind of, to coin a phrase that we use in the UK all too much. They could either do that and try and kind of put up defences to sort of help them to be more resilient to the next storm, or they could retreat and go through a process of managed retreat where they actually kind of just migrate away from the coastal areas, kind of abandon them really, and to leave them behind. And obviously this is not an easy decision to make and not a cheap thing to do. And Staten Island, compared to some other places which suffer these sorts of storms, has the luxury of having the wealth to be able to have those sorts of choices, that they can actually retreat. They have a government which can find the resources to enable that sort of thing to happen. But having said that, they weren't sure what they wanted to do. So obviously at the beginning, when Superstorm Sandy hit, climate change was linked to it quite strongly. And you'd think that would be the case, the case for building, either rebuilding and building back strongly and securely, or for retreating. Climate change would be central to that, because it was unlikely to be, it is unlikely to be a kind of once in 100 years type event, which these sorts of events used to be. It's, as we know, with the onset of the climate crisis, it's more likely that these storms are going to happen and there's going to be more sort of damage. So while the conversation was started, that climate change was being cited quite often as a reason to either retreat or to rebuild. And eventually they got to the point where retreat became the kind of favoured option. Most people there wanted to do it, but they needed to convince the local authority, the sort of New York government, to actually help to pay for that to happen. They wanted buyouts. They wanted the state effectively to buy their homes and therefore give them the money to retreat inland or to retreat somewhere safer up the coast. But instead of putting climate change at the centre of that story and of that kind of case building, something really, really interesting happened. And actually, this researcher called Dr. Liz Kozlov, who's based in New York, she went and spent time there to sort of analysing what was happening and the reasons and how they were building the case for managed retreat. And what she found out was that climate change was actually kind of slipping down and people weren't talking about it as much. And she found there's kind of two main reasons for this. The first one is that Staten Island is quite politically, it's quite conservative. It's kind of where Republican voters tend to live if they live in the US, in and around New York. So it's quite conservative. So at that time, remember this is 2012, there was probably quite a lot of people there who were climate change deniers, or at least skeptics, or trying to play down how important, how major climate change was going to be. And for them to sort of try and make the case that they should retreat because of climate change would be quite hard for them to do, because they kind of identify as people who were more skeptical about climate change. So they were kind of looking for another reason to justify the need to retreat. And the reason they came up with was kind of quasi-religious, really. They were talking about Mother Nature needing her land back. That's kind of how they started to talk about it. So there's parts of Staten Island which are very low-lying and have been reclaimed from the sea or on land where the sea would quite often inundate when there's high storms and so on. And so they kind of latched onto this Mother Nature wants the land back, because they meant they didn't have to talk about climate change. And then people who were kind of climate change believers kind of allowed this to happen as well, because from a pragmatic sense, they saw that, well, if we need a case to be built for the managed retreat that we need, and so that we can get the funds to do it from the government, we'll go along with this story, and we'll also kind of not talk about climate change too much. And so sort of signs like this started to pop up around the neighborhood. So they're asking for Governor Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, who'd just become the mayor of New York, and he still is. He's he started to get pressure on that Mother Nature wants her land back. And he actually latched onto that story then. So he'd initially started talking about climate change, but then saw that, oh, there's an opportunity in this for me, because if we talk about managed retreats in Staten Island being because Mother Nature wants her land back and not because of climate change, it means that other communities in the New York area who'd also been devastated. So you should see some of the images of what happened in New Jersey and other parts of all across the Eastern Seaboard. If these residents of Staten Island were given the funds to retreat based on the climate change threats of the future, that would mean that all these other communities all along the Eastern Seaboard would also be able to make the case that they should be able to retreat because of climate change, which obviously would cost the state a huge amount of money. And so for Governor Cuomo, it was like, oh, maybe if I latch onto this Mother Nature wants a land back story narrative, then we can say, actually, no, it's not because of climate change that the retreat is happening and that we're giving the funding for this. It's because those houses should never have been built. It was a poor planning decision a few decades ago, and we're kind of righting that wrong. So what was essentially happening is what's called agnostic adaptation. So people were adapting to climate change by retreating, but they weren't kind of admitting that it was because of climate change that they were doing that adaptation. So they were kind of deliberately being silent about climate change as being the reason for the adaptation they were doing, which clearly was an adaptation to climate change. They were doing it for their own kind of self-interested ways to make sure they got the money to do the retreat. And I tell this story at the start of the book, and I wanted to tell it today because it's kind of a metaphor for how the climate movement itself talks about adaptation or doesn't talk about adaptation. We have been, especially in the environmental side of the climate movement, quite silent about it. There's a lot of focus, and rightly so, on mitigation. And I would never say that it's an either or. For me, adaptation and mitigation are very much the two sides of the same coin. But the adaptation side of the story isn't really told very often. And so we end up kind of not acknowledging some of the adaptations that are happening around the world. We're not talking about them. And we know that they're happening and we know that they're going to go on happening, because even if we are as successful as we want to be and limit warming to 1.5 degrees, things are still going to get worse before they get better. And people are going to be living with the impacts of climate change on a daily basis, and they're going to be adapting to it. And some of them will adapt well, and some of them will adapt in selfish ways. Some of them will adapt in kind of mindful ways and in line with other agendas. So I really want to raise these sorts of questions. Now, are we acknowledging climate change adaptations that are happening around the world? Are we reporting on them? Are we asking authorities to invest into projects that can enable the most vulnerable people to adapt? Are we ensuring that the adaptations that are happening in ways which don't cause all sorts of negative knock-on effects? Because we can, as I'll show in some of the examples later on, some adaptations can just end up causing more environmental problems and more climate change. You can pour a whole load of concrete to create a dam, and while you're building all that concrete, you're emitting loads of carbon emissions to do it. So there's ways of adapting which are just going to cause more knock-on effects and kind of social injustices as well. Are we pointing out the precedents? So this is just asking that question of saying, Staten Island has retreated because of climate change, not because Mother Nature wanted the land back. And if we're doing that as climate advocates, it means that other people who need to retreat will be able to make the case to their governments and say, look, Staten Island retreated because of climate change. We should retreat because of climate change. And we need your support to do that before the storm hits, not after it hits. And it all comes to this question of, ultimately, are we staying quiet on adaptation? Are we being sort of too heavily focused on the mitigation side of climate change and maybe not giving enough attention to the adaptation side of it? And what I feel is happening is that adaptation is gradually coming up the agenda, and more people are talking about it, and they're starting to see that it can be done in ways which are great and ways which aren't so great, ways that have knock-on effects and don't. But this conversation needs to continue to happen, because adaptation is only getting a small slice of the pie when it comes to climate finance. It's actually from the 100 billion, which was supposed to be promised to global South nations as a result of the Paris Agreement, only 80 billion has been forthcoming in 2020. And of that 80 billion, only 1.6 billion is going to adaptation projects in the most vulnerable countries. So really hardly anything's being spent on it. And that's largely to do with the the people who need the adaptation and need the funding for adaptations, their voices aren't being heard, and the climate movement isn't standing up for them probably enough. Although that is changing, and this is what we're trying to do with this Great Adaptations project, is try and get this up on the agenda a bit more. So I'm going to do a quick sort of whistle stop through some adaptation stories I kind of came across as I was researching and writing the book. This is just an image just to sort of visualize heat waves that happen. Here in the UK, we're not so used to having heat waves. We're not as used as our sort of southern European neighbours to having them. And what the result of that is that we end up kind of adapting in really kind of ad hoc ways, and probably in quite some agnostic ways as well. We're kind of adapting in ways where we don't even realize we're adapting to climate change. We just think it's a hot day. So we're doing all sorts of crazy things like running down the shop to get ourselves a desk fan to keep our offices cool, and just kind of getting the cheapest one we can find. We're cranking up the air conditioning. We're kind of, one of the things which happened to me once, actually, I was on a train journey during a heat wave, and the air conditioning on the train had broken. So the kind of conductors kind of in the panic, they just dished out a whole load of single-use bottles of water, and just, we think of all the plastic pollution that created. So there's all this kind of like ad hoc, sort of instinctive, reactionary kind of adaptations that go on. We have, UK is not very good at sort of adapting to climate change. This is just a picture of train lines that buckle. So we need there's such strong adaptation needs here to sort of think, do we need to have tracks that can cope with the intense heat so they don't buckle? We're not brilliantly adapted in this country yet, and a huge amount of work needs to happen. And we tend to just kind of rush out and do things like buy really cheap plastic handheld fans, or my personal favorite is this, which is a sun lounger for pets, so that pets don't have to sit on the hot ground. I came across this photo, actually just an article in The Sun, our most infamous tabloid newspaper. So this is the sort of thing people do. They kind of panic, and they sort of just do these kind of really ad hoc adaptations. And no doubt that sun lounger broke within a few months and ended up on a landfill site and caused more environmental damage. So if we're not talking about adaptation, not thinking about it, not being mindful about it, not preparing for heat waves in a more strategic way, we end up just creating more problems and creating more environmental damage as we do it. So there's the case for talking about adaptation is to help people kind of to say, right, there's a heat wave coming, like, don't just rush out and buy a handheld fan. Think more carefully about, can you have strategies around restructuring your day, maybe having a siesta in the afternoon if it's going to be a hot day, things like that. Then looking around the world a bit more, this is a photo from recently from Canada, and quite a few countries are doing this now during heat waves. They're setting up cool rooms, essentially. I first heard about the ones in Paris during the Paris heat waves, and these are basically community centres or community-run centres where people who maybe can't afford to have air conditioning at home, or don't want to be sort of sat on their own kind of in their air conditioning. They actually want to go somewhere central and kind of share one air conditioning unit amongst 10 people rather than having 10 of them blasting away in 10 separate homes. And so these are being set up especially in countries which are more used to having heat waves, to help people to stay cool. And they're kind of similar to how in Britain, and I guess lots of other countries as well, one of the reasons people went to pubs, to public houses back in the day, was because they were a shared location to get warmth, and so people would go there to sit around the fire and tell stories and everything else, and obviously to drink. But it was somewhere they could go to stay warm. And these are kind of a similar thing. It's where people go to find coof, and this is something which is going to increasingly happen. And if that air conditioning unit in that place can be run from renewable energy, if they have a good way of, if it's in a building which is well shaded, they might not even need the air conditioning and so on. So these are the kind of adaptations that are happening. Lots of cities. When I'm not in West Wales, I live in London, and there's more and more places popping up where there's kind of fountains in the street where people can go on really hot days to keep cool. But there's some crazy things happening as well. This is a photo from Doha in Qatar, ahead of the World Cup, which is happening there in 2022. They're actually air conditioning the football stadiums, even though they're outdoor football stadiums. So they're putting fans in all through the stadiums to keep people cool while they're watching the football. And Qatar is obviously in the Middle East, and these are going to be powered by fossil fuels. So this is an example of an adaptation, which is really kind of a maladaptation. So in the process of coping with climate change, they're creating more climate change. So seats, you can see just about the fans underneath the seats there. So every seat is going to be cooled if you're in that stadium, which is going to be quite surreal to be there. But I guess it's a way to kind of adapt to the heat. This is obviously quite a famous example, going to kind of the other extreme. In mountain communities, this is just the generation of, this is like a snow machine, which, they started sort of making artificial snow in the 1950s in New York, in the Grisinja resort was the first place to do it. But it's happening obviously all over the world now to try and keep ski stations open. I found that in Italy, and this was a 2011 study, that 186 ski resorts have already closed in Italy because of a lack of snow. Which is, I was staggered that there were that many ski resorts anyway in Italy, but for 186 of them to have closed already, and that's just Italy. I mean, not just because of climate change. People, their hobbies change over time, but climate change is a big factor. But there's ski resorts all over the Alps and all over the Rockies and all around the world that are trying to kind of adapt to climate change, adapt to the heat, which is making skiing more difficult by spraying snow everywhere. And obviously they need to generate loads of electricity to power those things, which is creating more fossil fuels being burnt and more climate change as a result of it. One of the most crazy examples of it, though, which I came across, was in Luchon-sur-Bagnéres, which is in the French Alps, where they're actually using helicopters to fly up to the higher slopes above the ski resorts to collect snow, to then drop it on the slopes below to keep those slopes going. And it's a kind of a crazy example of how, by doing these adaptations in a kind of incremental way, they're actually kind of masking the effect of climate change. Because for the kind of the skier who's there, who's not really tuned into what's going on with climate change, they kind of think, oh, there's snow here, great. They're not really thinking about where that snow has come from. And it kind of, if there wasn't snow there, they'd be thinking, well, climate change, this is an issue. But when the snow is kind of artificially put there, it helps to kind of mask the actual reality of what's going on. So it's kind of a form of climate denial in that sense, or kind of builds into sort of a denial of how big the problem actually is. And this is another example I found was in Moscow, in Russia, and in and around Red Square, when they have the New Year's celebrations, they aren't getting the snow that they used to get. So they're actually doing artificial snow to kind of create a winter wonderland in Moscow to kind of keep that illusion going. And again, loads of energy being used to do it. Another kind of area which is interesting in agriculture, and Gary and I have had conversations before about the effect of climate change on agriculture in terms of coffee, but wine is quite an interesting one to look at. So champagne is made in the Champagne region of France. That's why it's called champagne, and you can't call it champagne if you make it anywhere else. So, but it's becoming harder and harder to grow it there because of the heat, because of the droughts that have been experienced in central France. And some of the big sort of champagne producing companies are now starting to migrate north and trying to find places where they can set up vineyards, for example, in the UK, to grow sparkling wine in the UK because it's now warm enough to do it there. So they're adapting to climate change by migrating and pushing north. But for vineyards that are smaller and and not as wealthy and can't just sell their land and buy some new land, actually what's happening, which is really interesting, is that they're trying to make a decision on whether to keep going with the variety of grape that they're using in their location, in spite of climate change, by kind of pumping in more water or whatever they need to do to kind of keep growing that type of that type of grape. Or they're thinking, well, we can't grow this anymore in central France, but maybe we could grow a grape that grows in southern Portugal. And so what they're doing is they're ripping out their old vines of the grapes that they've been growing for centuries, and they're actually starting to plant new vines with varieties of grape which are more adapted to the heat. So they're kind of adapting in that way, which is really interesting. And that's wine, but that's happening across agriculture and loads of different crops. That's happening. The farmers are kind of needing to change the crop they're growing, or the big agriculture companies are kind of abandoning land and moving to places where they can continue to grow the things they want to grow. In Morocco, this is a fog catcher. It's it's basically a net which they put on the mountainside. And in Morocco, there's, it's an arid area very close to the Sahara. So in southern Morocco, water shortages are becoming more and more acute. And so what they're doing is they're erecting these fog catchers, which catch the mist, which kind of comes up the mountain at the beginning of the day. It kind of turns into droplets on those nets and then filters down into pipes, into guttering system, which then goes down to help irrigate the fields or to just provide drinking water. And it's enabling some villages to survive and to not be abandoned. So there's another sort of adaptation which I thought was really interesting, is one we're looking at that we can potentially do in Nepal. And speaking of Nepal, I'll finish up by talking about what's being enabled there through the Glacier Trust and through the work we're doing with our partners over there to try and help these communities not just to adapt to climate change, but also to develop economically, socially, culturally, and to kind of stay alive as communities in the face of multiple pressures, climate change being one of them. So we're the thing we've had the most success with is the development of community-led agroforestry resource centres. So these are, you can think of them kind of like garden centres that we have in the UK and Europe. They're places where people can come to buy different crops and to learn about how to grow different crops back home on their kind of kitchen gardens or on their land if they're farmers. And so this agroforestry centre was set up to try and help farmers in Dosa, which is in Solakhumbu, in the kind of Everest region of Nepal, to start to do agroforestry, which is essentially the farming of trees. And what we have been working on with Eco Himal, who are our partners over there, is to help them to grow kind of higher value crops like coffee, but also lots of different nut crops like macadamias and almonds, hazelnuts, and so on. We're trialing all those different crops and seeing if they can grow in the mountains, and helping farmers to gain the skills to be able to grow them and look after those crops, but also enabling them to kind of form into cooperatives so they can get those crops to market. And also, as much as we can, we're trying to help them to process as much of the coffee, if it's coffee, locally, so that more of the kind of value of the coffee is kept close to where it's grown, which helps the communities to kind of develop economically. And this is, we hope, a kind of early example of what's being dubbed transformative adaptation, which is where it's not just kind of adapting to climate change and to try and keep existing kind of social, cultural, economic structures in place. It's actually part of a movement to actually transform the economic structures and to transform society in a positive way in places like Nepal, which have been traditionally kind of asset stripped by the global north. So normally coffee grown in Nepal and countries like Nepal is exported as kind of raw bean and then roasted in Europe or in North America or in Australia, and the roasters then in those countries get all the money. And actually what we're trying to do there, and hugely inspired by NOT1BEAN on this, is to enable the farmers, but if not the farmers, at least the local roasteries in Nepal, in the capital cities, to roast the coffee there and then to sell the roasted coffee rather than the green bean, because then more of the money stays in Nepal. And it helps to challenge the kind of inequality between global north and global south countries by helping more money to stay in Nepal and for it not to be kind of asset stripped through doing it. And it's proven to be really popular. We've been really this agroforestry resource centre was set up in 2015, and we've since been able to open another one in another part of Nepal, and in Kavre, which is closer to Kathmandu, and that's doing a similar thing, starting to help farmers to grow coffee and other higher value crops, and to come together into a cooperative to be able to sell them in a kind of not-for-profit way, with really strong gender equality principles around that, and making sure that the governing boards have an equal split of genders, and that nobody's really kind of making a profit for themselves off it. Is very much sharing it out and helping the whole community to grow, so that more money can be invested into everything else that the community needs, so that into the schools, into the hospitals, into the roads and everything else, which will help that community to grow. So that's kind of the model that seems to be happening. We're not necessarily pushing it as the Glacier Trust, but we kind of agree with it and really love to see it happening, and are doing what we can to make it happen, to fund those sorts of projects and to try and spread this community-led agroforestry resource centre model a bit further. This is just a picture of one of the kind of training events which goes on. So farmers will come from neighbouring villages all around the resource centres to sort of learn on. This was a coffee training, how to grow organic coffee, how to process it, and they all come together to learn those things. But they also learn things like how to make pesticides out of natural cow dung and urine, but also and plants, to actually make organic pesticide rather than spreading more chemicals. And they were doing similar things, learning how to do organic fertilizers as well. So really kind of having a really holistic view of development, and not just thinking how can we adapt to climate change in a really self-interested way, how can we do it in ways which actually improve and enhance society and the environment as well. There's a nice picture of the coffee being processed there. So yeah, that was a bit of a whistle stop of it. You can find out more about what we do at the glaciertrust.org, and there's all the information about the Great Adaptations book there, but I'm happy to answer any more questions about the work we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phillips. There is one question I wanted to touch on. You mentioned a number of times that you're working on a small scale projects and involving small communities, etc., etc. But when you talk about something like glacial melt, how many people does something like that, irregular glacial melt, actually affect in Nepal area? Are we talking millions?
There's the Himalayas is kind of known as the third pole. It's one of the kind of names it has, because it's the third largest kind of massive snow and ice in the world. And it is, higher altitude areas experiencing climate change more quickly. It's like the temperature rises faster there. It's kind of 2 or 3 degrees of warming. It's already happened at those altitudes. And so the glaciers are melting. And the consequences of it are, there's kind of two ways, I guess, in which it's affecting people. The first is a kind of dramatic, headline-grabbing disasters that can happen. So as glaciers retreat, so as they get smaller and smaller as they melt, they form glacial lakes, which form behind what's called a moraine, which is a kind of massive rock and mud, and which is all full of ice. It's effectively a natural dam. But over time, as the temperatures warm up, that moraine, because it's kind of permafrost inside it, that starts to thaw and starts to become weak. And also the weight of water behind it means that eventually that's going to burst. And when that bursts, you get a glacial lake outburst flood. And that can, happen very, very quickly. A huge torrent of water comes down a valley, destroying villages, land, farms, etc. So there's that effect. And across Nepal, there's hundreds of these glacial lakes. There's some which are only just forming, that people have never been to. They're so remote and they have no idea how deep they are. There's actually one up the valley from that agroforestry resource centre, which until about 5 years ago was just known as Lake 464. Now it's finally been named, but they don't know how deep it is. They don't know how stable the moraine is, but they do know that if it bursts, it could cause a huge amount of damage. So there's that kind of side of it. And then at a more macro level, the Himalayas and the water that comes down from it into the sort of major river systems and the Hindu Kush as well. So right across that band of mountains, there's the Brahmaputra, the Indus, the Ganges, the Mekong, the Yellow River. That water, billions, like 2 billion, 3 billion people are reliant on that water for agriculture, for drinking, for washing and everything else. So if we lose those glaciers, then that water is just not going to be there in the same volume, and it will still rain up there, but you won't have these storages of ice which kind of let the water out gradually over the course of the year. It will just kind of flood and go out, and it will disappear. So there's huge concerns, and ICIMOD, who are based in Kathmandu in Nepal, have doing lots of work looking at what's happening, about how dangerous it is, but because Nepal and the other countries in that region don't have huge finances, it's very difficult for them to work out, which glacial lakes to kind of dam and kind of manage the water flow from. So it's quite worrying what could happen there. And obviously water is such a crucial thing. And at the local level, we do some projects to help farmers to, capture water during the monsoon season by creating kind of small ponds and things like that, and guttering systems, and so that they can maintain the water to use it all year round, because they're finding that whereas the monsoon used to be really predictable and you could almost predict to the day when the rain would start again, it's now not at all. And so, it can be 2 or 3 weeks late. And so the end of the kind of winter as they wait for the summer can mean there's, crops can fail really quickly.
Yeah, that was sort of the point, we all talk about small scale projects, mitigation, adaptation projects, but the consequences from these adaptation projects not being in place, on something like glacial melt, we're talking about 2 to 3 billion people are unsure of any future.
Yeah, but it's going to massively disrupt the water flow, and obviously it won't happen overnight, but it'll, the consequences are huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So why the book? Why the book? Why the book? Why did you write the book?
I used to be, before I joined the Glacier Trust, which was in 2015, I used to work kind of in the environmental movement, and as head of eco schools was my first job before moving to Glacier Trust. And I didn't really know much about adaptation at that time, and it wasn't something that crops up very much, and it doesn't crop up very much in environmental circles. And what I kind of realized through visiting Nepal, the times that I have, is how desperate the need is for adaptation, because we talk about climate change and we're worried about the threats of it, but as people actually been hit by it right now, they kind of, they've caught climate change already in the way that people have, catch diseases and COVID and things like that. And what are we doing to help those people and to support them to get through it, and to be able to do it in ways which aren't just going to cause more problems in negative knock-on effects of it. So I really just wanted to, adaptation is a bit of a taboo topic in some circles. People don't like to talk about it because they think that people will accuse them of giving up, or saying that, climate change is not that bad a problem because, we'll find ways to adapt to it. And, I can certainly sympathize with that, but there's, adaptations are going to happen, and they are happening, and they're going to, and more and more of us are adapting, and we will do, as temperatures go up and then, hopefully stabilize. But there's good ways to adapt, and there's really terrible ways to adapt. There's kind of self-interested ways of adapting, and there's really kind of mindful ways of adapting. So, but unless we're talking to people about it, they're just going to adapt. They're either not going to adapt, or they're not going to get the funding to adapt, or they're going to kind of adapt in really ad hoc ways. They're going to just, rush out and buy those plastic fans to keep themselves cool on a hot day, or cities are going to get away with, using huge sort of concrete dam projects to hold back the sea, rather than thinking about could we sort of reinstate mangroves as a way to help reduce the impacts of coastal storms and things like that. So just kind of really wanted to write it to get it, for my colleagues in the environmental movement, to help them to sort of start to talk about this and start to investigate it a bit more, and to think about, we talk about transport and green ways of transporting around the world, and we need to talk about green ways of adapting as well, because it's just something we're all going to be doing.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. Does anybody else have any questions for Dr. Phillips?
I had a little question that because I was interested when you talked about climate adaptation that hides the effect of climate change. I thought that was really, really interesting, because it's something that I haven't really thought about before. So do you have any, how have you found that we should do climate adaptation to avoid the risk that we kind of downplay the effects of climate change, so to speak? How should we avoid that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because we obviously want to live as comfortable a life as possible and continue to do the things which, make being a human a good thing. Nice. It's nice to be able to continue to ski if you enjoy skiing, so you can sympathize with people doing it. I think really, the danger is with these kind of incremental approaches to adaptation, which kind of are just sort of adapting to like, oh, it's got a bit warmer in the last 5 years, we'll get a snow machine in, or these sorts of things, is that we're not really preparing for the transformation of society that needs to happen. Like, it's, the scale of what needs to happen in terms of, the deeper questions around, do we continue to pursue GDP growth as a kind of central objective, or do we actually need to think about lowering the amount of stuff that is done in the economy so that there's less material footprint? So I think I've been really drawn to the transformative adaptation movement, which is a kind of a positive spin-off, I guess, of the deep adaptation movement, which I'm sure people have read about and heard about, which isn't quite as positive. But the transformative adaptation movement is really more about how do we fold adaptation into a broader process of societal transformation to help to create kind of successor civilizations, I guess, which are going to be more resilient to climate change as it happens, but also living in ways which are more ecological and more socially just. And so that's the stuff which I've been really interested in. And I think, the more that the adaptation strategies that are chosen are nature-based and not reliant on fossil fuels, the better, really. So there's, in the home, for example, simply having plants in your house can help to make the internal environment cooler, so that you don't maybe need to put the air conditioning on quite as early as you would have done otherwise. Good architecture can mean that buildings can be cooler during hot days, and some of that can be, adapting existing architecture. Doesn't mean knocking buildings down and starting again, because there's obviously that creates a huge footprint. But I think windows can be shaded and so on to do that. More advice around how to stay cool. In Paris, they're doing things like opening the parks 24 hours so that people can, if it's too hot at night, rather than they can go for a walk in the evening time and sort of sleep during the day. So there's lots of ways. I mean, it's just the more kind of, I guess, the more ecologically intelligent you are, and understanding of what's a green way to adapt and what isn't a green way to adapt, you can apply those principles to your adaptations, which means that you can adapt in more mindful ways, really.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we I'm over in South America. I'm in Colombia, and we find that the farmers here, they actually want to carry out adaptation practices. They want to be involved with mitigation. Whether they have the resources to do that is another question. But yeah, I think it is important to be able to differentiate between adaptation for adaptation's sake and things that really work in the long term, rather than adding to the problem.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions for Dr. Phillips while we have him? Sounds like it's all gone quiet. Well, it's been a pleasure to speak to you again, Morgan. We have spoken a number of times on Twitter and on the phone, and I'm full of admiration for what you do. I really am. We'd be happy to have you back to talk about the progress you've made in Nepal, or even the setbacks. But from our point of view, it's been an absolute eye opener. I'm sure that the book will live up to all expectations, and we'll distribute a newsletter after this event, where we'll include the details of the book and the website and how we get in touch with you. But from me, I'm as I say, I'm full of admiration for the work that you do. Your enthusiasm is absolutely infectious, and keep up the good work. We'd be glad to have you back to discuss just how much of the good work you've achieved in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. And we're looking to expand it, and we think the agroforestry model is proven to be popular in Nepal. And we want, we're only doing it in 3 villages, and we want it to be happening in 300 villages across.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not just Nepal. I think it can work in countries like Colombia as well. So it'd be great to keep chatting.
Why not?
I'll stay on for a little while, but I can't stay till the end. Sorry, but thanks again for the opportunity.
Not at all. You're very welcome.
To hear from you.
And thanks for spending the time with us this morning. Okay, I think right now I'd like to say a word or two about coffee. it does sort of tie in with some of the information that Dr. Phillips has just given us. We're a coffee supply company, NOT1BEAN. We're a UK company. We're based in the UK and out here in Colombia, where I'm speaking to you for today. I came over to Colombia 11 years ago. I visited a lot of coffee fields, a lot of chocolate fields and other fruit farms and the like. And it was quite apparent to us in the early days that basically there was a discrepancy between what was happening at the workplace as such, what was happening on the ground, with the perception of coffee in supermarkets and in the media in general, in consumer countries. We traveled across Colombia looking at coffee fields, and all we saw we just saw poverty, we saw child labor, we saw modern day slavery, which still exists in the coffee fields. It's not got any better. And it became very quickly apparent that there's a huge difference between coffee before roasting and coffee after roasting. The generation point, the profit generation point in coffee is at the roasting stage. There isn't anyone in the coffee sector that would argue with that. You know, before coffee is roasted, it's called green coffee. It's not worthless, but it's not far short. I mean, lots of farmers, they plant food crops to survive alongside the coffee. Something like, I think it's 75% of coffee farmers across the world earn less than $100 per year from coffee. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's coffee, it's a cup of coffee. It's not anything that's going to change the world, you know. But the coffee supply chain, a lot of people describe it as the second largest movement of commodities across the planet. It's not, but it's up there with the biggest supply chains anywhere to be found. And this profit generation point is at the roasting stage. So, for instance, if a kilo of coffee is purchased for $2 a kilo, after roasting, that same coffee is advertised not just as ethical and sustainable and often climate friendly, but it's advertised at $30 a kilo. So we spend a lot of time just basically traveling around Colombia and Panama, finding out why this is the case. Everybody seems to have their own solutions to this, to the slavery problem, the modern day slavery problem, and the child labor that frequent coffee fields across the coffee belt. Everyone seems to, you know, we have people talking about, you know, we feed a fraction of the money back. It didn't really make sense to us. You take out $1, feed 20 cents back. That's not really sustainable. And nobody really made any attempt to change this status quo. There's so much money in coffee. I mean, this is a $100 billion industry. So much money and such expansion. I mean, the coffee industry is expanding. There's new outlets open in consumer countries every day. And this difference between what happens on the coffee field and what happens in a coffee shop in Chicago or London or wherever, there's an incredible disparity there. All because this roasting doesn't take place at source. Now, people talk to us about all kinds of, you know, initiatives, planting trees and spending money on water conservation projects, etc., etc. But this still persists, and we didn't get anywhere with this. We didn't get anywhere with trying to change opinions on this. until the climate crisis really took hold and people started to listen about the climate crisis. And what people don't realize is that green coffee, green unroasted coffee, and you have to appreciate the scale of this. In a country like Colombia, we have 560,000 coffee farmers just in Colombia. 20 million families are affected by coffee prices going up or down or whatever across the world. $100 billion plus industry. And yet these farmers, we see these farmers and it's just accepted as the norm, unable to educate their children, planting food crops alongside coffee to survive. And so the last thing on their mind is climate mitigation. I mean, every coffee farmer I speak to wants to actively get involved with climate mitigation, climate adaptation, but they literally don't have a penny to do anything with. And when people started looking at the problems associated with the climate emergency and accepting that it was a climate emergency, it is a climate emergency. No matter who you argue about, who argues who started it, how it became about, we are in the grip of this now. And so we changed our focus. We don't accept that coffee farmers should rely on family to pick coffee and they can't accept their children, but we have to shift our focus. And we looked at the environmental impact. Green coffee is up to 20% heavier than roasted. So we are shipping 20% of the world's coffee purely as waste. It's purely waste that shouldn't be shipped anywhere. And what we then found, so if it's not roasted before shipping, it's up to 20% heavier. Millions of tons of it. And then we found that amazingly, disgustingly, whatever adjective you want to use to describe this, we see countries on the CBI website, countries like Germany, who advertise that they re-export this coffee. They don't touch it. They re-export this coffee. They make the figures readily available. So this coffee crosses the Atlantic, goes into Germany, and then goes back out and crosses oceans again, purely in the pursuit of profit. And this is not just one or two journeys. In 2019, Germany, for instance, they reshipped 350,000 tons of green coffee, Belgium in the same year. And if you're going to the northeast coast of America, of the US, North America, I should say, you'll see millions of tons of green coffee ready for re-export. So these container ships are crossing oceans needlessly, purely and simply in the name of profit. And then, of course, we get to the consumer country. The coffee arrives when enough money has been taken out of the supply chain, or enough money is about to be made. And roasters, hundreds of thousands of roasting companies, roast the coffee and then put it back out on the roads. So we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of extra journeys, all in the name of profit, all just so that roasters can make $28 over and above the $2 a kilo that they pay for this coffee. And some roasters do pay more for specialty coffees and that type of thing. But if they pay a little bit more to the farmer, they charge a little bit more at the other end. So we have this ridiculous scenario of one of the world's biggest supply chains loading container ships up to 20% heavier than they should be, and then resending these container ships across the same oceans. And then roasters in consumer countries adding hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of journeys onto this supply chain. And then eventually this coffee ends up on a supermarket shelf. And underneath it says, or on the bag itself, it says climate friendly coffee, sustainable coffee, ethical coffee. And I don't, you know, I don't claim to be the authority on this. And what NOT1BEAN does, we basically, NOT1BEAN means NOT1BEAN is roasted outside of the producing country. Not one bean of our coffee ever will be, not one bean of our coffee ever has. So we basically roast in Colombia or Malawi or wherever, and we ship the coffee directly to the supermarket or the retail outlet. Now for us, that's the only type of climate friendly coffee there is on the planet. You can't add journeys and then buy carbon credits or whatever to that particular model. And we end up with consumers being misled in supermarkets, and it's not the supermarket's fault. The supermarkets are told by the coffee supply companies that these are climate-friendly coffees. They don't tell the supermarkets how many times this coffee has crossed the Atlantic. They don't tell the supermarkets how many times, how many extra journeys, how many millions of extra journeys are added to the supply chain in the name of profit. Every social enterprise on the planet promotes these coffees, anyone in the coffee supply sector, big tech companies, charities. Charities are under the misapprehension that they're doing good by buying coffee from these farmers and paying maybe an extra 20 cents per kilo, per pound, whatever. When in actual fact, the damage that's being done on their behalf is phenomenal, colossal. So in a nutshell, what we do is we roast at source and we transport directly to the retailer or directly to the consumer. And we can't honestly see how anybody can argue that an individual, a climate concerned individual or a climate positive company, a company that's calculated net zero forecasts, a company that buys tons and tons of coffee. How can we have this situation today where these companies are unaware that all of their net zero calculations, all of their scope 3 emission calculations are irrelevant if they buy coffee in any quantity? Supermarkets buy millions of tons of coffee in this way every year, and yet I see scope 3 ambition, you know, posted on websites and on social media, and none of them have taken these calculations into account. None of them. So that's where we come from. That's NOT1BEAN. That's what we do. We can't really get our heads around the fact that universities, and what I'm saying, by the way, applies to every supermarket on the planet and every university on the planet. There's not one climate-friendly coffee in any of those organizations unless they're transported in that manner. It's impossible to be climate-friendly other than roasting first and shipping once. Reduce the weight and ship it once. It's very straightforward. We don't really see the argument for not doing that. And if I was at university today and I joined a university based on the sustainability criteria of that particular university, and I was studying a subject related to, I don't know, the environment or climate change, sustainability, whatever, I think I'd have a right to know exactly what coffee was being served to me by the millions of tons. You know, universities buy colossal amounts of coffee. And we've looked at lots of universities across the planet. We can't find one climate-friendly coffee. And at the same time, we can't find one coffee supplier to universities who are happy to admit that it's time to change this particular supply chain. We're not going to change it the way everyone buys coffee. We understand it's not going to happen. But right now, I doubt if you'll find the odd coffee that's roasted at source. But every supermarket we've ever entered, every university campus, every university we've ever spoken to, every single one of them is under the misapprehension that the coffee they serve on campuses is somehow climate friendly, and it's exactly the opposite. The scope 3 emissions in the coffee supply chain are, they're just incredible, and it's an absolute travesty that people think that something like coffee is being transported in a climate friendly manner, and that there are companies out there, supermarkets, universities, public sector bodies. We spoke to the British government 2 weeks ago, and the guy we spoke to, the sitting MP we spoke to, he was horrified to hear this. In his constituency alone, there are 14 new supermarkets due to be opened in the next couple of years, 2-3 years, and there isn't one climate friendly coffee in there. That's millions of tons of coffee, and all his constituents being misled into believing that this coffee, because it has a label on it saying sustainable or climate friendly. Obviously, the coffee sector doesn't look favorably on us. They don't like the idea of us complaining about this diversion of profits away from developing countries. We have the facilities here to roast coffee, and we do roast coffee here. The same machines exist in Colombia as they do in Chicago. And the profit generation point in coffee supply is at the roasting stage. Before that, it's more or less worthless. After that, vast fortunes are made. Now, if we're serious about climate mitigation, firstly, we shouldn't be shipping heavier product than we need to. Roast the coffee, it's 20% lighter, up to 20% lighter. We shouldn't be shipping it more than once across oceans. And we certainly shouldn't be adding on hundreds of thousands, if not millions of extra journeys. The people that I speak to in coffee fields, they would love the opportunity to mitigate climate change, to get involved with projects at source here. These are the people that are going to be really affected by climate change. We see coffee now that just doesn't grow on the same slopes as it used to. We have to go to higher slopes for coffee to grow. And the difference between what Dr. Phillips, an example that Dr. Phillips gave, the Champagne example, where Champagne suppliers, where vineyards are having to move up slopes or to different areas, it's a little different in a place like in Colombia, where the land is available. Coffee takes 3 to 4 years to actually come to maturity, to grow, before you can harvest. And in the meantime, these people don't have any money. So climate mitigation is the last of their problems, even though they're all absolutely committed to helping in the fight against the climate emergency. And that's it. Our story is quite a simple one. We believe that more of the profit within the coffee supply chain should stay with the people with the most to lose. We think that roasting at source is perfectly possible. We do it all the time. We don't see the reason for green coffee to be shipped more than once. And we really don't see the reason for millions of extra road journeys to keep coffee roasters reaping the benefits from this supply chain. So that's about it. That's where we come from. I don't really want to go on much longer because, we don't want people thinking that this is the NOT1BEAN coffee club and anybody who comes on here is going to be bombarded with information about buying coffee or anything like that. That's our story. We'd be delighted to talk to anybody about how we can take this further. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Yeah, I have one quick question actually, and that is because I know, as you said, you've been going around and talking to all kinds of different people about this. So, what kinds of responses do you usually get when you talk about this to I don't know who we've been talking to, but to supermarkets, universities, maybe even coffee companies. Like, what do they? What are their objections? What are their reactions? Like, why isn't it as clear as you think it is that this should be the way to ship coffee, basically?
We get one objection, Adam. We get one single objection. People say to us that if you roast coffee at source, then by the time you transport it, you have a problem with shelf life. The coffee needs to be fresh. It needs to be roasted around the corner from the supermarket. Every university labors under this misconception. Every supermarket on the planet is told this by coffee suppliers. Every single one. Now, if that's the case, that coffee is only fresh for a very short period of time, and a 3-week journey on a ship or a 48-hour flight is going to adversely affect that, then how come every single supermarket on the planet puts a sell-by date on their coffee between 8 months and 3 years? Every single supermarket. And I'm not making idle claims here. We've been around supermarkets. We've done surveys across the UK, and we have photographs. And the supermarkets are under the impression that their coffee is fresh. So there's only two possible outcomes of this. One is that we are correct, and that supermarkets are being misinformed by coffee suppliers based on this freshness argument. The universities are serving coffee that's heating the planet to climate concerned students. Or supermarkets have been selling stale coffee for decades. It's one or the other. It can't be anything else. It really can't. I challenge anyone to go into your local supermarket, wherever you are, Stockholm, Mombasa, wherever you are, and all the coffee will be dated, sell before, best before, 6 months if you're lucky. 3 years is quite common. The most common is between 1 and 2 years. So this argument just absolutely falls to pieces when you just pick up a bag of coffee and look at the best before date. Because, you know, people in Colombia, they are more than capable of roasting coffee just like anybody else. And saying that they're only capable of picking the coffee has quite a few undertones that we don't want to go down. You know, we don't want to explore. The same roasting machines, the same roasting equipment exists over here as it does anywhere in the world. You can even install German roasting equipment in Colombia, and you can run it from Germany. They're all computer controlled. So there's no lack of know-how, there's no lack of knowledge. There's just this resistance within the coffee sector to basically leave more of the profits with the people who really need the profits. And that money that's left in developing countries in the coffee supply chain would make a huge difference to climate mitigation efforts. People would be able to move coffee crops up slopes so that they can carry on producing coffee. There is no coffee tomorrow. If we carry on the way we are, there is no coffee tomorrow. Something like 50% of the world's coffee lands will be wiped out. They won't exist. And that may not seem too bad. We can live without coffee. But what about the 20 million people who rely on this as their main income? What about the children that need educating from these, you know, as a result of the profits from these crops? So there is no argument. There really isn't, unless you're saying that supermarkets have been selling stale coffee for decades. There is no argument. We roast at source. We don't take the roasting income out of the country and then feed a fraction back. We leave it here with the people that need it. We transport it once, directly to the supermarket, directly to the university, or directly to the consumer wherever possible. We certainly don't, we can't carry on the way that we are in the coffee sector. And that's the only objection we get at them. We don't get anything else. People say things like, well, we like a blend of coffees. So we bring in a coffee from Kenya, another one from Cambodia. We put in a bit of Colombian and then we mix it and then we have to, that's no excuse to keep heating the planet like this. That product shouldn't exist, you know. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, to go over the top with this, but I see the results of this every day. I've been in Colombia for the past 11 years. I see children sleeping on mattresses in coffee fields because of the lack of money at source. Climate mitigation is just, you may as well ask them to take you to the moon. And yet the enthusiasm is here to carry out climate mitigation or climate adaptation at source, you know. It's here, and there's no reason why more coffee, far more coffee, can't be roasted at source. At the moment, over 90% of it just isn't, you know. And yeah, that's the only objection we get at them. Sell-by dates, freshness, and then they stamp the same bag with used before 2024.
I could just add to that, actually, Adam, as well, that shipping roasted coffee to other countries is not something new. There's multinational coffee brands out there that will roast in Chicago or the Netherlands and actually send that coffee to the UK, to Scandinavia, or even in certain circumstances back to the country the coffee was grown in as a roasted product to feed the coffee shops people drink a daily cup of coffee from. Now, I'm not going to sit here and name them, but they're multinational coffee companies that are global around the world.
That's very true, Mike. I mean, they're the biggest coffee. What we're doing is nothing new. The biggest coffee companies in the world take their coffee, green coffee, and they roast it and then they transport it across Europe, across the US or whatever. So what we do is nothing new, except our roasting is done at source. And it benefits the people who need to be fighting this climate emergency with funding. So we simply advocate what they're doing. We think it's great that they roast before shipping, but why not just roast in the place where the coffee was grown, and leave the money there, leave all the roasting income there. You can't divert roasting income and call it a sustainable project. You can't just take $1 a kilo out of a country and send 20 cents back and call that ethical and sustainable. You can't just put a green stamp on a bag of coffee and say it's climate friendly coffee. And companies need to take this into account. If you're calculating your Scope 3 emissions or your net zero targets, and you're a supermarket or a retail outlet that deals in coffee, or you're a company with thousands of employees and you buy coffee for these employees, how can you not take this into account? How can you become carbon neutral in 2022 if all this is going on your behalf? Cargo ships recrossing oceans, millions of extra journeys, money stripped from coffee producers because the profits are needed by the latest, coffee chains acquisition in the King's Road or wherever in London. It's not ethical. It's not sustainable. It's certainly not climate friendly. You can call your coffee anything you like. Gourmet coffee, special coffee, the best coffee in the world. You can't call it climate friendly if it hasn't been roasted before shipping to make it lighter and shipped once. And right now, apart from a handful of other very, very small producers, we're the only people even talking about this. The sector as a whole, I mean, it's a gigantic sector, in a $100 billion industry, doesn't even want to address this. And it's only changed. They've only started listening to us since we moved away from the poverty aspect of the whole thing, since we moved away from trying to highlight how many children are involved in coffee production, since we moved away from modern slavery, because everyone's got their own ideas. If there's any good thing to come out of this climate emergency, it'll be that consumers look at supply chains like this and demand change. It's the individuals that will change these supply chains. It's the consumer walking into a supermarket. And the coffee sector is just one, the coffee supply chain is just one, albeit enormous supply chain. It's just one out there that consumers need to look at, corporations need to look at, companies that offer consultancy on carbon neutral targets need to take into account, because it's bought and sold on such a huge scale that the profits from that supply chain being spent in the right area at source, be it in Brazil, Colombia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Panama, wherever, the climate mitigation, the climate adaptation that we could do, that we could achieve, the impact we could see is phenomenal just from that one supply chain. So that's NOT1BEAN, that's what we do. We're happy to never mention coffee again if it benefits this particular event. We're going to put together a newsletter after this event. We're going to distribute it each month after the event. NOT1BEAN.com is our website. Mike will give you a. In fact, Mike's my co-director actually in the UK. Mike, can you tell people how they can get in touch with us and what they can do after this broadcast if they want to?
Yeah, it's quite straightforward. Just email us directly at info@not1bean.com using the numerical number 1, and that will just come through directly to myself and Gary, and we're happy to answer any questions you've got on what we do, alongside any future events as well that you may want to participate in. So just drop us an email. Everything will be shared with We Don't Have Time as well. So if anybody wants to contact Adam directly as well with any questions, he'll forward them on to us as well, and we'll get those replies to you. Yeah,
so you can contact us directly at the website. You can write us an email. You can contact us through We Don't Have Time. Tune into this event as it progresses monthly. You'll see lots of good initiatives. That's our contribution to the to climate adaptation, climate mitigation, to the climate emergency, if you like. That's what we firmly believe in. And that's it. That's as much as I can say about coffee. Unless anyone has any further questions, happy to answer them. No? Okay. In that case, then I think we'll thank you for listening. I think we'll, Monica, are you about? Do we have Monica from?
Yes, Gary, I'm here.
Hi, Monica.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello to everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
Monica's. Thanks for being so patient, Monica. We you know, when I start talking, it does get a little bit out of hand. I do appreciate that. And Morgan ran over a little bit with his presentation, but it's so interesting what he does. You know, it's we're really pleased to have him on board and taking part of this, as we are you, Monica. The floor is yours. If you'd like to tell us what you do at Stockholm Environment Institute, we'd love to listen to what you bring to the table.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, all of you. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm glad to be in this coffee club. We are in the morning right now in Colombia, so I will share my screen. It's okay? You're looking at it?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, okay. Looks fine.
Great. So again, good morning. My name is Monica Trujillo. I am a researcher at the Stockholm Environment Institute, SEI. I am based in Colombia, in Bogota, Colombia. And well, I'm going to change from coffee to cassava. I'm going to speak about cassava, bioeconomy, and climate action. So a little context about the SEI. SEI is a think tank with a global reputation for its work on sustainable development and especially in climate change. Within its strategy for the coming years, one of its global initiatives is bioeconomy and its governance. And SEI has generated research and advocacy in Europe, Africa, Asia, and Latin America within this bioeconomy initiative. In Latin America Center, I am working in the bioeconomy line of inquiry, and it has the purpose to mobilize changes in public policies, in business strategy, in research and social plans to facilitate the transitions towards a sustainable bioeconomy. Between 2019 and 2021, we have conducted 2 case of study, one about quinoa in Bolivia, and the other one about yuca and its potential for Colombia bioeconomy. And I will focus on this research and what we found. As you know, the bioeconomy approach has gained visibility and importance at global level during the last decades, and it is mentioned as key to the solution of some of the greatest challenges of our society. For example, climate change, loss of biodiversity, food security, equity, job and income generation, among others. As you can see, the definition of bioeconomy is based on biological resources, including knowledge, science, technology, innovation, to get to a more sustainable economy. Currently, there are more than 60 countries in the world with bioeconomy policies. So in Latin America, there are only 4 countries with bioeconomy policies, strategies, or plans: Argentina, Brazil, Costa Rica, and Colombia, that has launched its bioeconomy strategy at the national level the last year, in 2020. This national bioeconomy strategy from Colombia has a mission to contribute to the decarbonization of the economy and promote the mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And its main objective is to promote socioeconomic development through the sustainable use of biomass, biodiversity, and its ecosystem services. Biodiversity plays an important role here in this strategy because Colombia is the second most diverse country in the world. So it's very, very important here. And as you can see, the goals to 2030 are related to create new bioproducts, 2.5 new million jobs, and facilitate 10% of the GDP of the country. At the bottom, you can see the working areas of this strategy. According to the national government, 4 of them contribute directly to the climate action SDG. So, getting into the cassava's world, we have found that cassava is a very versatile biological resource. It comes from the Amazon basin, but currently there are more than 100 tropical countries that harvest it. It's a crop of great importance for food security, as it is a resource that resists severe climate conditions. In Colombia, is the 4th most important crop. Colombia produces 2.2 million tons every year, And the main use of the cassava is for traditional human food, and mainly using the root. A curious fact is that in Colombia, the leaves are hardly used, even though they have a high content of protein that is very, very important for human and animal nutrition. Other countries in the world, for example, some countries in Africa, use the leaves to food security and to feed animals. When cassava is processed to extract starch and flour, a world of possibilities for bioeconomy open up. From its starch and flour, specialized ingredients can be generated for the food industry, for the animal feed industry, for bioethanol, biomaterials, cosmetics, phytopharmaceutics, paperboard, among other industries. I will focus only in the potential use of cassava in Colombia to produce biomaterials, such as thermoplastics, biopolymers, and films. Those are bags, containers, among others. Although it's a potential use, right now it's not commercialized, but it's a potential use, Colombia is taking the first steps to produce bioplastics in the country and not to import them from other countries. So there is an important trend in the world to reduce consumption of plastics from fossil origin. In 2018, 66% of the countries had already adopted some type of regulation to reduce the consumption of plastics from fossil resources. Although bioplastics production represents only 1% of the world's total plastics production, but it is projected to have an average growth of 20% by 2024. Colombians consume approximately 24 kilos per person per year in plastics. This represents 1.1 million tons per year of plastic, which shows a significant market for substitution options as biodegradable alternatives. The University of Cauca and other universities have been working on processes and technologies to produce biomaterials from cassava root. The University of Cauca has 4 patents that can be transferred, that are ready to be transferred to the private sector to produce bioplastics from cassava in Colombia. Meanwhile, there's a project of law that prohibits plastics, single-use plastics, and promotes substitution of biodegradable materials. And it is being discussed in the Colombian Congress right now, but it has had many difficulties, and there are a lot of group of interest that are delaying this decision. But there's an important discussion right now in the Congress. So to end my presentation, I am going to highlight some opportunities and challenges that Colombia faced to turn this great alternative into real actions. With the production of bioplastics from cassava that is produced in Colombia, great progress would be made in generating incomes and employment for Colombian producers and entrepreneurs. Substitute fossil plastic for biodegradable ones. That means minimize the contamination of the country, and reduce starch imports from other countries, and obviously its carbon footprint. And there are a lot of challenges to turn this into real actions. but I am going to focus only on 4 challenges that Colombia has. The first one is to promote public policies that encourage cultivation of cassava and the production of biomaterials with sustainability criteria. The other one is to implement sustainable production systems that involve industrial varieties that currently are produced in monoculture. And this could be made through value chains agreement. And obviously not to expand the agricultural frontier to plant more cassava. The other one is to facilitate public and private alliance involving universities, research centers, government, enterprises, and civil society to invest in the sustainable production and transformation of cassava into starch and into flour. And finally, to facilitate conditions for investments in small and community biorefineries with the private and public sector. So SEI is working on those challenges with local actors, local governments, and research centers to turn these opportunities into real actions. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. Mike, I think you have a question for Monica. I know you asked me and I couldn't answer.
Yeah, as cassava as a product, is it something that grows all year round, or is it a seasonal crop?
Excuse me?
Does cassava grow all year round, or is it seasonal?
It is seasonal. It has two seasons to harvest.
So similar to coffee in Colombia, it has 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And I believe it grows in arid conditions, yeah? So it's very it's very low maintenance, yeah?
Yes, that's because it's a very important crop for food security in tropical countries.
Food security.
Arid climate and severe climate conditions.
All right. Well, forgive my ignorance, but when you said not to expand, it was important not to expand the agricultural frontier. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, Monica?
That means that the ecosystems in Colombia are so fragile and so biodiverse, with a great biodiverse importance. So there's a consensus not to expand more agricultural area to impact those ecosystems, but to make them more productive and competitive. The small producers, they are not so productive. They have low technology. So in business as usual, they need to expand and have more area. But with like a trade-off with biodiversity. Cassava is cultivated in very fragile ecosystems like for dry forest and humid forest also. So it's better to make the current area more productive and not to expand to maybe deforestate the ecosystem.
So it's more a case of improving efficiency as opposed to expanding across the country. Yeah. Okay, and you said that there's 4 patents to produce cassava bioplastics just in Colombia, and then you talked about resistance to this. I mean, it sort of seems incredible to me and probably to a lot of people on this, that there's resistance to producing bioplastics, you know? Is that a real concern?
Prohibit the plastic market. Yeah.
Incredible. Okay, so what happens next, Monica? I mean, you finish your study, is it a case that you do regular reports on the progress of this, or do you go to the market looking for finance for a project like this, or is it just a case of raising awareness from SEI's perspective?
Yes, as I said, we are a think tank. We guide and orient the government, and we will continue working with local governments to achieve these changes in policy makers and entrepreneurs also. And we're planning to organize some policy workshop, some political dialogues with new leaders, new regional leaders and national leaders to promote this message, to encourage this cassava cultivation and transformation into biomaterials. So basically we work with local governments, with research institute and entrepreneurs to motivate their efforts to invest in this new opportunity.
Very good, very good. And of course, SEI have numerous projects just like this all around the world. I think, how many countries are SEI in? Do you know?
We have 8 centers in the world. There's one in Thailand, one in Kenya, in UK, headquarters in USA and Latin America.
And Stockholm.
Yeah, headquarters.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, well, fascinating to hear from you. Does anybody else have any questions for Monica from the panelists?
I guess this is more a reaction than a question. But you said that, as I understood it, the goal is to have cassava production contribute to 10% of GDP by 2030. Did I understand that correctly?
No, bioeconomy. The whole
the
bioeconomy.
That makes a lot more sense. All right, but how much would it have to grow to reach that goal? Like, where is it?
A lot. Yes. I think right now it's like 1%. Wow. So the goal is very is a great challenge for Colombia, and Colombia has to move very quickly to react to those goals that it has planned.
Yeah, the willpower is certainly here in Colombia. I mean, we see it in the coffee fields, you know, people wanting to get involved with positive projects. And you've heard from Monica there that, you know, just one project like cassava, you know, the potential is quite phenomenal. You know, the resistance is to the use of plastic. You know, people promoting the use of plastics. It's not exclusive to Colombia. Monica, thank you very much for coming today. It's been a pleasure to see you again and to listen to you. We'd be delighted to have you back again if there's any progress at your end, and I'm sure that your colleagues at SEI, they'll have more than they'll have plenty of opportunities to plenty of projects to speak to us about. I'm sure of that.
Yes, of course.
And by all means, if you want to speak to your colleagues about them coming forward and discussing some of the many opportunities, some of the many research projects that they're working on, you know how to get in touch with us. But I mean, feel free to talk to. We don't have time, and we hope to hear from you soon, Monica. Thanks again for coming. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you all.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Okay, Adam, I think that about wraps it up from our side of things. I don't know whether you guys have anything else that you'd like to add to the broadcast at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really exciting to hear about everything that you have to say. We actually got a few questions in the comments on our end, so I would suggest you to take a check in the Within the Time platform for questions and answer them in the comments after this broadcast, so that we can keep the conversation going, because that's definitely what we want to do here. We want to use our network and move this onto the We Don't Have Time platform to keep the discussion going. I feel like the main takeaway that I get from the discussions here is that we have, as we said in the beginning, we have so many good initiatives and good ideas and innovations, but what we lack is the funding. I think it has been a lot of talk about lacking the funding we need, and also, of course, the awareness that is necessary. So yeah, I mean, that's I think we can all do a lot to increase awareness, and the financial community has a very high responsibility to make sure that the funding is there to scale these things. But other than that, I think we're it's been very interesting, and head on over to wedon'thavetime.org or search for the app in the App Store or Google Play, and let's continue the conversation there.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, Adam, and thanks for everyone behind the scenes that We Don't Have Time. I hope that everyone's enjoyed this. As you'll see, what we want to do going forward is to bring positive stories like the Cassava project in Colombia, like the work that Dr. Phillips is doing out in Nepal. We want to bring that to the forefront of the conversation. And please get in touch if you or your company, or if you as an individual want to present a project to the We Don't Have Time network. We'd be delighted to hear from you. And at that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you for joining us, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.